2021, our current global traffic volumes will actually triple. And then finally, we're also seeing networks converge. If you think about a building that was in construction only maybe 10 years ago, it would have been fitted out with several networks, one for IT, one for lighting, one for air conditioning, one for your closed circuit TV, one for lifts, the list goes on. Today, it's a single network connecting all those different types of utilities. So that has meant that people think about the network differently. It's actually all of a sudden become a mission critical business asset, firstly. And secondly, that has created a need to think about security differently and a need to think about security really from the inside out, because all of a sudden we've opened it up and we're connecting everything to it. So that's on the network side. Anthony, what about the security landscape? What do you see changing in that space?
Yeah, so from security, simplistically speaking, is all about protection, detection, and response. In fact, we even simplify that further. It's about visibility and control. In the network context, control, segmentation has largely been how we've implemented control on a network. Visibility, we've kind of left to other devices, firewalls, intrusion prevention and what have you, and they've largely been in the perimeter. And while we're on the subject of perimeter, the perimeter has largely been set up to protect the infrastructure of the business. And by that I mean the servers and services, for example, that might be publishing content and what have you, and to create so the DMZ, for example, creates some segmentation between those servers and services at a network architecture level, and other things that might sit within the environment, like, say, database. But we've seen, and they still need to be protected, but we've seen the attack surface expand to include the user now. And if the user's compromised, then you have a situation where you have the mini Trojan horse that's sitting inside the environment. And really, I think most networks are designed so that the inside security is not as robust as the outside looking in security. So we've got a couple of things going on here in summary. We've got a shift or an expansion in the attack surface to include users, and if they're compromised, then they really become a vector by which threat actors and criminals can be in the environment, combined with a pretty decent lack of visibility from that point forward. And when you look at a lot of the breaches that have been in the press over the last few years, this is exactly what's going on in those instances. So Rob, how we do segmentation and visibility, how do we do that in a modern Cisco network?
Yeah, well, I might start with the visibility piece first. One of the things that not many of our customers actually realize is that you can actually use the network to give you visibility of what's actually happening. So access points, switches, routers, the devices that you're using to provide connectivity can actually give you an understanding of what is happening within your environment. And we do that by looking at the patterns of behavior. The patterns of traffic actually translate into an understanding of the behavior of your users and of your devices. And we can use that in a way to be able to determine what's normal and what's actually not normal, what's abnormal. And to be able to then look at the abnormal observations and determine whether they're potentially malicious. Look, and Wasim's going to talk a little bit more about that later in one of the tools that he demonstrates. So that's on the visibility side. On the segmentation side, we're really excited because we've just released a new capability that we call software-defined access. That's our means to actually define a policy that sits across all of the network, across wireless, across switching, and it helps us to put in place a rule that facilitates the separation of all these different devices and users that are connecting to the network. And I'll give you a quick example in the retail space. I was talking to a retailer only a week or so ago, and they were talking about how they'd actually rolled out Wi-Fi in all of their stores, predominantly to connect their mobile point of sale system, so their cash registers. But what they're doing more recently is they've rolled out a number of apps to engage with their customers. Really critical to the business. They've demonstrated the value associated with these apps in terms of additional revenue generated. But for an IT person, having someone on an app in-store connecting to this same network, which is servicing all of their internal applications, is actually really stressful because the network was never built to actually cater for that. It's a very flat environment, and IP addressing, etc., hasn't been approached from the perspective of this micro-segmentation. So they feel really exposed. So the ability to deploy this policy over the top of their existing network and have it translated automatically into the changes to keep their shoppers separate from their mobile point of sale, for them, is a real game changer.
Fantastic. But Rob, we've done segmentation before. I mean, how is this different?
Yeah, we kind of have done it before, but when you think about the way we approached it previously, we used things like access control lists, which were configured on every individual device. It very quickly got complex and hard to work with. You know, again, I'll give you an example around healthcare. Many hospitals, they're connecting everything to their environment. For example, patient monitoring, they're connecting their biomedical systems, they're connecting even things like robotics in the operating theatre. Now, we have customers that have tried to use things like access control lists to provide micro-segmentation in an environment which is highly connected like that. And very quickly they find that the level of complexity gets to a point where they become a little bit paralysed because they can't even make changes without being concerned that they're going to break something. So it hasn't worked in the past. And it gets even worse when you start to think about devices being mobile. Because you think about patient monitoring, it's gone from something that happened at the patient bedside now to a biosensor which is worn by the patient who can walk right throughout the hospital. If you're trying to use access control lists and IP addresses to create your segmentation on a device basis, it's really, really hard to do. So, Anthony, we've covered visibility, we've covered segmentation. What we haven't yet talked about is context in and as it pertains to policy.
Yes, and in the security world, a policy means something a little bit different. But you need some way to take a statement about what security you want and instantiate that into the network. And really, what we're talking about is taking intent and mapping it to context, if you like. And by context, I mean applications, users, devices, and using that context, and we can use that and many more to make decisions about what where and how and what things those contexts can do. Now you can think about some examples like wireless guest access or network access control as being examples of that everybody would be familiar with in this area. All we're doing here is just extending where and how we can, and the flexibility associated with applying that policy on the network. Fantastic.
So, Anthony, do you have any customers that are actually going down this path? And if so, what are they actually focusing on?
Yeah, we do actually. There's one we've engaged with recently. They're a large government department, and they're really looking at what their new network is going to be, their network of the future. And it's being driven by a couple of overarching business issues that they've got. Number one, their department is seen as not really keeping pace with the business, being a little bit unresponsive. And the second one is just internally, they don't have a level of visibility that they need. They've got different classes of networks, different security levels of those devices, and of those networks, and it's kind of a blind spot for them. And so they see this as a way of doing two things. I mean, the very first thing they want to do is get visibility. What's happening in the environment? But that's just a stepping stone to actually having much better control and doing it in an automated way. And for them, it's all about efficiency, because they believe if they can make their team more efficient, then their team can be more responsive to the business and improve not just the outcomes for their group, but also for the business itself. But it's a big change. Networks are mission critical. They don't want to get it wrong, so they're taking their time, and they've actually engaged Cisco Consulting and Advanced Services to help them, take them on that journey, if you will, starting with mapping out their high-level business outcomes right down to the network architecture into the more sort of technical domains.
Very good.
So now it's the time for the technical part of the show, if I can put it that way. And we're going to go to Wazim, who's going to really just show everybody a little bit, in a console sense, if you like, what we've been talking about so far. Take it away, Wazim.
Well, thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Rob. And thank you, everyone out there, for joining us today. I'm going to be taking you through a demonstration of some of those capabilities that both Anthony and Rob mentioned earlier. I'm going to be focusing primarily on how you as a user can get visibility back into your hands and then go on and deliver security outcomes to your organization. And what you've got in front of you here is the StealthWatch capability. And I'll be going through the StealthWatch platform today. And I've got a little surprise for everyone out there. I'll be sharing with you some of the latest innovation that we've done in this particular platform. And the demo here is going to take you through a real-life scenario of how our customers operate these kinds of platforms and some of the things you can do with the power of the network. So right now I'm logging into the StealthWatch console. And what you can see now on the StealthWatch console is a real-life view of your security environment in the way in which the network sees your users and your applications. So we have this cockpit view of all of that data that is crossing that network that a vast majority of our customers today have sitting in their environment, but are simply not making use of that intelligence. And what we can see here along the top there are some broad security categories that show us some of the real-time security events that we need to focus our attention on. The one that I'm actually going to be focusing on for the purpose of this demonstration is data hoarding. And we can see from this particular dashboard that there are two instances of data hoarding that we need to be concerned about. So what is data hoarding? Well, data hoarding, simply put, is internal data theft. And for many organizations, this is a real challenge. And Anthony alluded to the fact that security now is moving more from a perimeter-based strategy to a more pervasive organizational-wide strategy, including the network as a living and breathing security control. The actual investigation now, when I look at that data hoarding incident, brings me to two particular users or hosts inside of the network. The one that I notice here of most concern is a user called Workstation 149. Now, I don't know anything about this workstation at this point, but what I do know is that I'm hot on the trail in identifying what might be going on. So as I click into Workstation 149, what I actually see is a breakdown of that user's activity. So this particular breakdown shows me that this host is connecting to a number of internal resources that my organization own, and a number of external websites. Now, I can see below that the actual consumption of application and traffic inside of the network. So for example, if my company had a policy that users from using things like Dropbox, then I would be able to ascertain whether that user has been using Dropbox to potentially steal information from this organization. Now, to the left of that, I see more specific information and context about the actual user and the device that is associated with this particular incident. I can see that this user is active on the network. They have an IP address of 10.201.3.149. And the insider threat event is the event that I'm now looking at and want to get into more detail. Below that, I can see that the user has a username Ken and is using a Workstation Windows 10 machine. So at this point, I'd like to go and see who it is and what Ken has been doing. So Ken has used two devices on the network. These two devices have authenticated at different times. And Ken has also a little bit of a history in this organization, because I can see to the left-hand side additional security information that tells me that Ken has been doing things in the past. Now at the top there, I've had to hide the information about this user. But we can actually pull this information out of the Active Directory in order to understand the email address, the user photo, the department they work in, the telephone number, and so forth, so that we can go over and have a discussion with Ken about what's going on. At this point, I'd like to go into the forensic detail and look at the actual individual transactions that Ken has been consuming on this network. So when I click on the flow report, I'm going to look for the last 5 minutes what Ken has been consuming in this environment. Now I can go into this particular view and look at any information that is suitable to my forensic investigation. I may want to look at a historical view over the last 2 years, and I may want to see what Ken has actually been transacting with in order to understand a little bit of history as to what this incident is. And as I run that report, I get detailed transaction records and the exact paper trail as to what Ken has been doing in this environment. Now, this information, as Rob mentioned earlier, is intrinsic to the network. It is the paper trail that every user leaves behind when they transact in the environment. And so what we're doing here is capturing that information, correlating it, and keeping it for purposes such as this when we need to run either investigations or look for other outcomes such as network assurance or network capacity planning. Now at this point, I've determined that Ken has been doing something malicious. And I've decided to take a quarantine action in order to take Ken off the network and restrict Ken from doing anything further that's malicious. And this is where the power of the network, the power of the analytics, and the power of the policy and control really come together to work in one unified workflow. This particular integration works with the Cisco Identity Services engine, which has effective control on how users connect to the network, what they get to access, and whether or not they qualify to access specific resources or whether or not they need to be put in specific segments of the environment. At this particular point, I'm going to hit the quarantine button, which is going to take Ken off the network in order for us to limit the amount of damage that Ken can do moving forward. As I click that quarantine button, from this particular point in my operations center, I have disconnected Ken from the network. Ken may be in the same building as I am, or he may be in one of those remote offices that I have absolutely no control and visibility over today. And this is one of the ways in which we can get that effective control back. So that was a short example of our platform, Cisco StealthWatch, the Cisco Identity Services engine, and a Cisco digital network based on next generation routing, switching, and wireless can give us policy, control, and containment. At this point, Anthony and Rob, I'd like to move over to the next piece, which is the surprise that I've promised you. And I'd like to look at encrypted traffic analytics. Now, encrypted traffic analytics is one of those innovations that is close to my heart and is really revolutionizing the way in which we look at malware in a modern network. The challenge that a lot of our customers have is that malware operates in plain sight. And by that, those threat actors out there are using more sophisticated methods to not only enter our networks, but to also exfiltrate our networks and steal our information. And so, for example, what you can see here is a mechanism in which malware hides in plain sight by utilizing some of the common protocols that all of our networks allow to operate within. In this particular case, it's TLS or SSL, which is used between a user and a website. So for example, when I browse a secure website, I'm using TLS. Now, malware also can use TLS in order to hide within a customer's network. So how can we fix that problem? We have two approaches. We can either try and decrypt all the traffic and look inside of every single packet that's trying to leave the organization, which some of our customers do, which is highly cost inhibitive and getting increasingly more difficult to do. Or we can use some smart tactical techniques that are built into our network and that are supported by all of our security architectures. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So what is encrypted traffic analytics? Encrypted traffic analytics is the behavior of encrypted traffic in the network in order to identify whether or not that encryption looks suspicious. When the traffic is not encrypted, it's quite easy to look for threat behaviors. When the traffic is encrypted, it becomes increasingly difficult. So the process of trying to identify malicious traffic within encryption is something that we do in the network, within the analytics, and using our threat intelligence capabilities. In this particular architecture that you see, we focus on 4 main areas and how we do that. So first of all, we identify network level behavior. That's the first stage. We look for some global domain information. If you're familiar what we're doing with the security in the security space around things like umbrella and DNS detection. We're also looking at fingerprinting certain behaviors within encryption. And then we're obviously running intelligent analytics. And the example that you can see here is an example between a user that is doing an average Google search. That's the one at the bottom there. That's the kind of behavior the network sees when a user is transacting with Google through an encrypted connection. The one above that is a malicious malware family known as Bestafera. This was a malicious malware family that affected a large population of the global internet. And as you can see that this particular malware within an encrypted traffic behaves fundamentally different from a Google search. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking for. We're looking for these patterns and behaviors, and when we identify them, we're able to make very quick and tactical decisions, just like we did with Ken in that demo that I showed you earlier. So what are the components that make up an encrypted traffic analytics strategy? Well, it all starts with a network, digital network, that's based on our flagship 1000 platforms, our ISR series routers, and our ASR series routers. A vast majority of our customers have those platforms already or are looking at moving to those platforms as a part of their digital transformation. On top of that, that telemetry and that intelligence that comes from the network goes into platforms like StealthWatch, which understands models and transacts with the network to identify those behaviors, as I've showed you earlier. In addition to that, the important integrations with identity and context through the identity services engine to not only understand the user information, but also the device information, and then also to take proactive remediation to take that user off the network if we deem that user to be malicious. Tying that in with our global threat capabilities through our organization, Talos in security, as well as the machine learning techniques that we have within our products, we're truly able to deliver an industry-leading malware detection capability right in the heart of the network. So with that, folks, I will hand back over to Rob. I hope you found that demonstration informative, and we're looking forward to meeting each and every one of you through our respective activities and showing you these capabilities in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Wasim. It's pretty exciting to hear that the access points, the routers, the switches that you're buying just to provide connectivity can actually help you gain that sort of visibility across your network. So I guess that's an example of one way that we can use a network to help us understand what's going on in the environment. But now I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Robin Mock, who comes from the University of Wollongong, who's actually going to talk to us about how the university is actually using the network in a slightly different way to gain insight with regards to what is actually happening. Before I throw to Robin, I'll just a little bit of background about the University of Wollongong. They're one of the top 2% of universities around the world, with over 36,000 students and approaching 2,500 staff, so a pretty sizable organisation. They've also expanded now to becoming an international multi-campus university with 2 Sydney campuses, 5 regional campuses, and now opening up in Dubai and Hong Kong as well. Robin's been leading the early field trials of what we call Assurance It's one of the new capabilities that's come as a part of DNA Center. So with that, again, I want to welcome Robin and thank him for his time today. And I might open up with a first question.
Sure.
So, Robin, you've been doing a lot of work around assurance as part of the early field trial at the university. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on specifically, both with assurance and also in the wireless space, please?
Sure. So the university has been working with Cisco to go into the early field trial in assurance since the end of November. We currently run a wireless network which consists of 3,000 APs, 15,000 concurrent users. And every so often, we get the ticket coming in saying, wireless sucks, right? So previously we would look at Cisco Prime, we will look at the wireless controllers, the APs, ICE, to find out what the problem is. Everything is working fine, everything's ticking along, so why does the wireless suck, right? So with that, we entered the early field trial, and we got assurance, and we've targeted and focused on areas such as some student accommodation, high traffic areas such as where the food courts are, supermarkets, other food outlets, bookshops, and actually see how assurance can help us, one, map out what's actually happening under the hood, two, help us troubleshoot issues or find issues before it happens, and also if an issue does happen, with all the information that it collects, can it help us pinpoint or at least give us an idea where that problem may be? So for the past 2 months, working with Cisco to fine tune what those error messages are and fine tuning how we can fine tune them so that it makes more sense to us and it's actually accurate. Yep. And as well as using the tool so that it benefits not only the network engineers but also other users such as help desk or managers who may also be using this tool.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you're kind of moving from a reactive mode of operation to something a bit more proactive, which is fantastic to hear.
That is exactly what we're doing, especially when you have a lot of wireless users. Some users are reporting that there's wireless problem. What are those problems? We don't actually know what they are until we look into them.
Yeah.
But when we look at a dashboard where it's nice and clean, it can actually show you client health, and it can tell you, by the way, a subset of your clients are experiencing this issue at this area. We can quickly jump into it before it becomes a bigger problem. Yeah.
Fantastic. So with all this work that you're doing with analytics data and the assurance solution, how do you actually see the university benefiting from this activity? And do you see this collection of data, of analytical information, becoming more important or increasingly important to the university over time?
So from this EFT, I'm hoping that this will become the successful for a number of tools that's being offered by Cisco. Like I said before, right now when something happens, we use a swag of tools to troubleshoot, and it's very much reactive. So we use things like Cisco Prime, ICE, wireless controllers, the lot, including our info blocks for DHCP. With assurance, and at the end of this early field trial, I'll provide enough feedback to Cisco that they could go back and take into account and build on some of those things. And that will become a tool where it can correlate not just things on our network, but other external functions and other services as well, such as DHCP, AD. If there's authentication problems, let's highlight it. There's DHCP problems, highlight it. And in terms of collection of data, I think it is an invaluable asset for the university. Previously, we were very focused on plotting people in a physical space and learning how they use it based on a physical space. With the amount of data that we're collecting now, with Assurance, with CMX, we're not only putting physical spaces in, we're actually learning more how users are utilizing the network. It's more behavioral. So with that, the university can look at those results and data and actually create a better experience. So if the user is behaving in a certain way, let's put in the let's adjust the spaces so that they can use it better.
Fantastic to hear. I mean, you're really pushing the boundaries here because you're doing stuff that is brand spanking new. How do you keep up with these rapid advances in technology? What are the sort of steps that you're doing to keep across what's going on in Cisco, for example?
We try to keep it simple to a certain degree. It's always a weighing between complexity with secure what you have, or simplicity with allowing more things through and making it easier for people to join. We currently run an MPLS network to provide security and to provide segregation so we can identify groups of users. That in itself is proving to be a lot more difficult to manage, and I somehow don't believe that using IP addresses just for segregation is enough nowadays. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And it leads into the next question, which is, given that you're pushing the boundaries, have you started thinking about software-defined access, which is Cisco's newest capability in the area of segmentation and micro-segmentation? It comes back to the conversation we had a little earlier with regards to the application of policy across the network.
I've actually been screaming for it for the last 3 years. Okay. I was very lucky to be part of the ACI tab when they pushed software-defined networking in the data center space. And when they said, who wants it on the campus network, I went, yes, please. The reason for that is because, like I said before, having IP to distinguish if a particular device can have access to certain items is enough nowadays. Why should a user with a particular IP address be allowed access to certain servers and not others? If a user should have access to a particular web server, he or she should be able to do it from any network, right? If that user should not be able to access the internet, no matter what network he or she is on, should not be able to get access. And I believe that is where we should be heading.
I guess, given the fact that you've got 7 campuses now, most of your students and probably your staff are very mobile, they're moving across all these environments, that the mobility adds a level of complexity that a policy-based approach would actually help you address.
That's exactly right.
So given that you're now working with a lot of data, right? Working with, this is analytics that you're working with. How important is it for you to be keeping that data safe for the university?
Very much so. It doesn't matter if it's student data, staff data, and research data, which is the crown jewels of the university. We must keep it. We must keep it safe. Right now, we use firewalls to protect who have access to those data. We employ some level of encryption in certain areas. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to see who has access to it. If somebody did access it accidentally, it should be flagged because it is the crown jewel of the university.
Well, look, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, Robin. You guys are doing some fantastic stuff out at the university, and I'm really excited to continue hearing about what you're doing, particularly as you start to move into the segmentation area, software access, etc. Because I think it's truly going to make a difference to the way you work. Thank you again, Robin.
Thank you.
Okay, I think now we are going to go to some Q&A, which has been happening over chat session. Is that right? Got a little bit of time? Okay, fantastic. So what I'll do now is actually throw to Matt who's going to share with us some of the questions that have been collected. Thanks,
Yeah,
mate.
look, thanks very much, Rob, and thanks to all our speakers today. I'm sure you'll agree with me that today's discussion has been insightful education on how we can better secure our networks and infrastructure, especially when it comes to visibility, access, and control. With that in mind, we received a few questions during today's chat from our online audience. One of the first questions we'll ask, and I guess this one will be for Anthony, is what is ICE and StealthWatch and Talos, and how do they all relate?
Actually related to everything in the security portfolio. Talos is the name of the team that we have that does all of our threat research. So that team is responsible for moderating all of the content, all of the security content for every Cisco security product, whether it's firewalls, whether it's StealthWatch, whether it's Umbrella, email, web, whatever it is, advanced malware. That team moderates all of the content. So they have an intrinsic role in everything that we do. They are also responsible for making sure that intelligence that we collect from one product is then utilizable and put in a format so that it's consumable by all of our products. So that's Talos. Wazim talked about StealthWatch and ICE. StealthWatch is our network telemetry capability or set of tools, which are designed for two purposes really. One is the sort of security outcomes that you saw Wazim demonstrating, but the other capability is more around network analytics, performance data. How is if a user or a group of users are having problems with latency, then it can provide some great telemetry about where the latency might be coming from. Is it the network at all, or is it actually the application that's causing the latency? So things like that. And then our identity services engine, or ICE as we affectionately refer to it as, is the thing that maps. It's the way that you can talk to a Cisco network and get it to enforce a policy based on a whole range of contextual information. And I touched on this a little bit before, but it could be the identity of the user, and in Wazim's case, we saw him talking about Ken. Well, that data about Ken actually comes from the identity services engine. If Ken was using an iPad, we could make a decision that was different about where Ken could go and what he was able to do, that was different from if Ken was on his PC, for example. And so identity services engine is the thing that takes the policy, what we want the network to do, and actually enforces it down to a fairly granular level using a whole range of different contextual controls.
Thanks very much, Anthony. I'm sure a few people learn a few things then. So we'll give another one for you while you're on that roll. Based on the information and technology that we've discussed in today's conversation, what's the number one message that today's audience should be walking away with?
Look, I think we tend to think about security as being bolted onto the network. I know I've made a career of working in security, and that's largely how it's been. But I think hopefully we've demonstrated today that there are some fantastic security controls that are available out of the box in the network and usable by anybody that has a Cisco product.
Awesome. So Rob, now one for you. I don't want to leave you out. If I'm a customer or I'm a member of the audience in today's conversation, and I'm looking to take advantage of all these new features, functionalities, do I need to swap out my current network?
So the answer is no. If you've purchased access points, switches, routers from Cisco over the course of the last several years, the current generation of product, it will support most of the capabilities that we've talked about today. Because what we're actually doing, the approach we're taking is a software-driven approach where we're saying, okay, you've got the infrastructure. We're going to layer on top of that a software platform that's going to help you make the investments you've already made give you more back. So they're going to make the network actually give you more understanding of what's happening, as well as make the network take steps to segment these different types of traffic, different types of users, different types of devices. I will call out one exception though. Wasim made reference to encrypted traffic analysis, ETA. That does have a very specific requirement for the Catalyst 9K switching. And look, the reality there is the stuff that we're doing there is machine learning. It's pretty CPU intensive. So we've needed to introduce new hardware to be able to support the demands of that. But for 95% of the other things that we've talked about, they're available across the current generation of product.
Thanks very much, Rob. Back to you, Anthony. So how do the functionalities and features that we've talked about today augment or control our traditional security controls? Obviously, we've got still need a strong protection, and obviously ensuring web and email are protected and advanced malware is handled.
Yes, I think it was in the answer was kind of in your question in a way, because part of this is augmentation. We can see that there are some security outcomes that Wazim was talking about that, frankly, most of our customers aren't using today. The ones that are, love the information that they get out of this and the level of visibility that gives them in what is otherwise, quite a blind spot within their environments. And when I talk to customers, that's the number one thing that comes out of their mouths within the first 5 minutes of conversation is, I need better visibility. So we can deliver some great visibility outcomes, and I would see that as an augmentation. When it comes to the control, the segmentation side of what we talked about today, I think there's a more nuanced conversation there, because the way we've traditionally done segmentation in a network was a little bit, we heard Robin talking about it, really, it's been a little bit heavy-handed, it's been a little bit cumbersome, and that has limited the ability to use it more broadly. And so my prediction is that over the next, say, 5 years or so, maybe 10 years for the laggards out there to catch up, but definitely over the next 5 years, we're going to see virtually every organization in the world move to software-defined segmentation. It's simply a better way to do it. They can free up money and capital and time that gets devoted to maintaining firewalls and firewall rule sets on the network. I'm not saying you don't need a firewall, you do. There's some broad segmentation functions that you need in a network, and you need a firewall to do those and provide a much heavier level of inspection. But I think everybody has been waiting for the moment when we can take a lot of that segmentation capability and push it into the network and do it in a software-defined and automated way, which is going to make, I think, the lives of your general network administrator much easier and dramatically improve the security outcomes for the organization.
Excellent. We've had a latecomer question as well that I might throw to you guys, and I'll let either Anthony, you choose to take it, or Rob choose to take it. But a question from the audience has come when we've been answering these questions about device performance when handling heaps of applications of data, and how some of the the visibility that we've talked about today, some of those the aspects of the features and functionalities, will those heaps of applications and data, whether it's ICE or StealthWatch, slow down networking?
Look, I'll tackle it in terms of the network piece. So there's no doubt that collecting the telemetry information from the network does consume some CPU. But the reality is that with the current generation of product, we actually had that in mind when we developed it. So we effectively built in an additional ASIC or an additional processor into a lot of the current generation of product, precisely to be able to give us the means to apply detailed segmentation or micro-segmentation, and also to be able to do to collect analytical information, stream that back to a central source for analysis without bogging down the box. So I guess the answer is yes, it does take some CPU, but no, it's not going to kill your network, because we effectively foresaw that need and took that into account when we architected the current family of product.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Rob.
Yeah, and I might add to that. I think a bigger question here is, this is a different way of doing things, and so there's going to be some CPU cycles, if I can put it that way, and organizational CPU cycles that need to be invested from a training and from a skills development perspective, because I think the way it's done now, and the way it will be done in the future are quite a bit different, and that's going to require some cycles on the customer side. But I think from the hardware and software perspective, there's really no appreciable load that I think that displaces onto the infrastructure or the equipment that hasn't been designed for.
That's great. Thanks very much, Anthony. So look, with that in mind, I think that's it for our Q&A section. So I'll hand back to you, gentlemen, for the rest of today's show.
All right. Thanks, Matt. I think we're in the wrap-up phase. Really, I think if you like the sound of anything you've heard about today, if you want Wazim to come and visit you at some point in the future, or any of the 40 or 50 people that work in information security to come and talk about or show you these any of what we've talked about today, it's all available for demonstration, and speak to one of us or speak to someone in your friendly Cisco sales or engineering team, and we'd be more than happy to show you this in your environment. Rob, anything more from you?
Yeah, look, the only thing I'll add is, look, the time is now. The world has changed. Mobility, hyperconnectivity, and cloud are creating a different world out there that we need to get on top of. The technologies that we've talked about, they're not things that are coming, they're things that are here. We've released them. People like Robin and the University of Wollongong are actually, running this stuff out in a production environment. So I would encourage you to act now. Come and talk to us. As Anthony has said, we'd love to engage in a conversation around how these technologies can actually make a difference to your business, to your environment. And thank you for all your time.
Yes, thank you. And there is a 60-day trial available for StealthWatch Cloud. You can access that online if you want to get a little bit of a look in your own leisure. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.